thank them for that. Some good perspectives. Now, of course, the students. Now, we've all, I expect, heard about how, students are suffering with 3 hours aren't there. We've heard all of the spiel. What's the reality? There was some good research presented in San Francisco only last month, and I'd like to share it with you, as complex as it is. Looking at the testing that was done in science, we're not doing too badly. Up there at the top, above 525, is above us New Zealand, good on them, and Australia. So not doing too badly in comparison to others. This was a very US-centric presentation, as you'd expect. If we actually analyse this data looking at socio-economic impact on student performance and equitability, you're already going to guess that there's going to be some issues with the United States when it comes to equitability. So high average performance and high social equity, top right-hand corner. Low average performance, large socio-economic disparities down the bottom. High average performance and low average performance. The United States sits pretty much where I would have predicted it would sit, and if we normalise, we get a pretty good idea. Australia and New Zealand are doing quite well. Where's old New Zealand? I always take care of New Zealand.
When I become a student,
these are today's students.
When I'm a student, I want to have paper handouts. Why should teachers update the technology we use anyway?
When I become a student, I want to be judged by my marks and not by the person I am.
When I become a student, I want my iPod and my mobile phone banned because they cannot be used as learning tools.
When I become a student, I want to stay at the desk all day, every day.
When I become a student, I want to blend in with the crowd and suppress my personality. When I become a student, I want to be like everyone else and wear a uniform.
When I become a university student, I'm going to regurgitate all the information that I've learned in school.
Funny thing happened. I showed this video that the students made actually up near Byron Bay. I showed it at a conference at Ballina last month, and one of the chaps in the audience stood up and said, "Hey, that's my daughter. I can't remember signing a release form." Fortunately, I looked into it and his wife had signed the release form, but boy did I have palpitations after that, I'll tell you. I think a good reflection of how students use technology is to actually look at their real world behaviour. And this is marketing research from the States. I do have the source on the website. So in yellow we have disparity with higher male, lower female, and red, higher female, lower male. Some interesting findings here. I guess it's no surprise that both talk about boyfriend, girlfriends pretty much equally. Males talk about sex more. I wasn't surprised by that. Gossip, I hate to say it, but 39% opposed to 14% males. Terrible generalisations. But one that the females in the audience will appreciate, that deep feelings, men are clearly insensitive bastards. We only 9% of us talk about deep feelings, 23% of females. Interesting stuff, and interesting when you actually look at how they use the internet and how they use technology. Now there's a good deal of research out there. The EDUCAUSE report, the Horizon report that EDUCAUSE do is certainly one, and the 2008 report also looks at it. And if you look at these areas, this of course is Web 2 technology. This is all about collaboration. There's social networking extending to computers, virtual worlds, video creation. This is really all the sorts of technology that people are using and that folks in higher ed have spoken about. There are dozens upon dozens of social networking software applications, websites and so on out there, and you've probably heard of them. There's YouTube for grassroots video, hugely popular, squillions of videos popping up there. There's Facebook, which I went on to test out so that I could feel comfortable with it. I'm not all that fussed with Facebook, and I'll tell you why. You end up being prodded, or poked I believe is the term, by people who want to be your friend. And often they're people I haven't seen for 10 years. There's a reason I haven't seen them for 10 years. But they pop up anyway on the net. There's my old boss actually from University of Queensland who poked and prodded, and I couldn't say no to that one. In Australia, good old MySpace is certainly very popular with the young'uns. In fact, Facebook is called Fossil Book by some students I've discovered. It's still popular in the UK, but not so much in Australia for young'uns. MySpace has the market there. And you can tell so much about someone just by looking at this. This is a first-year university student who's got about 800 comments there. I read through them, and a million friends probably. He keeps boasting about how many friends he has, big deal. You can tell that he likes reading Virginia Woolf, and Frida Kahlo is his favourite artist, and you can tell a lot, and there's a lot of social networking. Virtual worlds are certainly, excuse the pun, taking off, and there's a lot being done in universities as well.
The other area that I'm involved in is the use of an application called Second Life, which is a virtual 3D environment created for the university last year, particularly utilising a product that's only available on the Apple system called Facto, which enables the sculpting of a 3D terrain that really allows a more naturalistic environment rather than the standard building block environment that's most often found in the virtual world. I'll just briefly showcase that with you now, taking you through a very quick tour of Griffith University 3D virtual environment, or Griffith University Second Life.
So Jason's from the Ed School there, or Education and Professional Development, I think they call themselves. A number of universities are putting their toe in. Some of the predictors, like the EDUCAUSE report, the Horizon report, are telling us that it's some way off until this is actually integrated into an educational setting for simulations and so on. If you think about ways that a virtual environment might be used, Southern Cross University are using it to build their new campus. They get feedback about the Second Life virtual campus that's directly fed back to the architects. So that's a very real world use of it. Now, I've shown this slide before, and I'm going to show it again because I think it's an interesting one to look at disciplines that are incredibly data intensive. So astronomy comes to mind. And, you know, they're looking for new kinds of objects, density variations, black holes, quasars and so on. And their data rate is doubling every year, and they're talking about petabytes of data by 2010. A lot of data. They're a data intensive discipline, as are the folks that run the European synchrotron. They're looking at data rates that have multiplied by 260 times over the last 10 years, doubling every 14 months. We're seeing an exponential growth of data. But the reality is, about 6 months ago when a snapshot was taken of data out there on the internet, although, yes, most is business and research, 858 exabytes of data out there, end users are creating an immense amount of data, about 700 exabytes. So this Web 2 generation is certainly creating more and more data. Now forget the maths. I was going to, any maths teachers here? Who can tell me the next, it's IT, exabyte, the next one. I think it's zottabyte. Do you know the answer to that one?
Sounds good.
Sounds good, zottabyte. So there you are. That gives you an idea of data. Forget all the maths. The reality is that it's really all about collaboration and sharing and user-created content. So when we talk Web 2, that's what we're talking about. You've heard the buzzwords, I'm guessing. Who are these students? Forget the buzzwords. The reality is they're individuals that think of computing and IT as an extension of self. They don't see it as something that should be locked away in a computer lab, which happens too often in schools nowadays. They get their 5 minutes of IT by rotating into a lab. They just see it as an extension of themselves. Now, interesting little bit of demographics here. A study that the Emeritus Dean of Education at Michigan has done, Carl Berger, has looked at the growth of a new type of academic, the millennial instructor. So this is the young academic coming into the turf, a postdoc perhaps, who have the same skill sets as the digital native, which have been well researched and well published, and certainly Apple like to get on the bandwagon talking about how there are digital natives out there. Now the reality is students are now coming to university with kit. About 86% in the US are predicted to turn up to university in 2009 with computers. And the classrooms are starting to look like this. We love it from Apple. And although I would never do it if I was in the classroom, pick on somebody in the audience, I would pick on this young lady because I can't see a glowing white apple there. But the rest of them are. Now, looking at local research, these data are a couple of years old now. Bev Oliver from Perth certainly has got some good data out there. Ownership has increased. We have about 25% now of students podcasting and accessing podcasting. About 34% are doing blogs quite regularly, and most are instant messaging. Let's look locally. And across the ditch is an interesting one. Our friends at ITS at Otago University did a research survey at the beginning of the year, this year. And they found out that 38% of students have a device that would play video, 65% that would play audio, 81.7% had a mobile phone. They use the American jargon for phone, which is strange for New Zealand, and 82% own a laptop. Different demographics, because of course Otago's in Dunedin and students come to the city to study, so you would expect they'd have more kit. They're leaving home. But it's still interesting research. Now, it's changed the way that students research. I put the flames there because this is a hell of a demonic looking photograph. But University College London have just published, and I've put the PDF up online, the Researcher of the Future. How are students using research? Some of the feedback's kind of depressing. UQ just presented, the head librarian there, and he's seen a huge drop-off of weekly attendance to the library, so it certainly has changed the way. Now, Krause and Kennedy from UMelb, actually Kerry Lee Krause has moved up to Griffith, have a very good point here. Just because the students can use this technology in their social life does not mean they can use it in a learning environment. And the role of the educator should include teaching the students how to use this technology.
Text messaging is usually banned from the classroom, but there's one lecturer who's encouraging it. He's developed a new way of using mobile phone texting to help student learning. The service allows students to buy access to bite-sized study notes and video footage. So Limited One tried it out.
It may look like a gruesome CSI episode, but what you're actually seeing is a science class dissection being played out on an iPod. It's the latest classroom teaching aid, along with flashcard-type text currently being used by tertiary students.
A couple of years ago, I actually gave my students traditional flashcards on paper, and as they were leaving the lecture theatre, they started putting them in the rubbish bin, and I queried why, and they said, well, this is great, but it's not cool to use these at the bus stop. People think I'm a student, people think I'm a nerd. So I thought, well, why not deliver on their cell phone? And they took that idea, and suddenly it was really popular.
The study and video texts are being trialled by 8 universities across the North Island, and they've been a hit. So much so that for the first time in New Zealand, they'll be tested on secondary school students from Trident High and Whakatane next week.
Any Kiwis in the audience? Kia ora. I like looking at what they get up to because it is a national curriculum and some really good stuff happening. Why did I show mobile device? It's no coincidence that I showed it because Apple have some kit that I think is going to be hugely important. And if we look at the Horizon report, it's predicted by folks like EduCause that it will become highly important. Mobile devices. So instead of carrying a notebook, sometimes mobile devices can take over. Now we saw what is happening at AUT in their research project. This year at some stage we're going to have the iPhone turn up in Australia, and it's going to be very interesting to see how that's being used. I expect it's going to be used in very interesting ways. And an indicator of that is over 100,000 programmers and developers downloaded the development kit for the iPhone and the iPod Touch in just the first 4 days. It took Palm Pilot 6 years to get that amount of download for their development kit. There's a huge amount of interest out there with developers. I think we're going to see some interesting stuff come down the line. Now, I've spoke about brick walls, and I'm going to speak about them again because, of course, the issue is, will these be able to log on to the network? Now, Paul Draper from the Con at Griffith Uni certainly in a recent paper spoke about how the IT guys can put up huge brick walls for teaching and learning. And I guess, you know, that's not surprising.
Now, to William Shakespeare, I've put the pencil down. And stop speaking about it. You know, it's It's confusing everybody.
It's that brick wall approach again, and it's one that I guess is not that surprising. Let's do a little bit of cultural anthropology, shall we, in technology land. When you look at ITS cultures as they grew out of mainframe computers, and indeed administrative computing, they see the world as knowledge workers, and they have a whole set of criteria that they use. They're very much revenue driven. They're into productivity and cost reduction, restrictive environment, tying the network down, a network-centric world. These are the sorts of things that drive them. But they're somewhat in contrast to a learning infrastructure. A learning infrastructure, of course, looks at a collaborative environment where creative exploration, ad hoc approach, expressive software is used, and it's a user-centric constructivist approach to the universe. So there is a cultural conflict within universities. I'm sure you've all come across it, haven't you? And I think the two can coexist quite happily. The ability to have IT in a learning infrastructure sitting within, and you need the authentication, and you need to keep the baddies out, and you need to tie down networks, but you can still have the two coexisting. It's a matter of educating our IT folks. Now, I said I dislike jargon, but the reality is folks like Steve Heppel, actually Heppel's left the Ultra Labs, but the Ultra Labs have come up in the UK with a new term, and it's the C generation, content creating generation. They also used it in another paper for collaborative generation, C learning. The jargon just keeps on coming. The reality is no matter how much you plan and you try to predict where things are going, culture changes and the technology tools change, and you're just not going to be able to keep up. Culture does eat strategy every day of the week. You know, you can plan as much as you want, but what's actually happening out there in the real world will affect us. And some IT groups are taking notice.
It will support iPhone, iTouch, certain handheld devices as well. All you have to do is just use your username and password, and you'll be able to log in and connect to the net using your handheld device.
So if you did want to download your lecture notes through your iPhone, you can just, find Base Station Connect, and there you go, it's on your phone.
So that film was done by, obviously not film people, ITS at UNSW, and they can see the technology is coming down the line, and they've changed their culture somewhat. They've opened up the network without worrying about, security is not compromised, so they put in the Wowie, Zappiest, most modern Cisco funky wireless stuff where authentication's all there, but they know students are going to turn up with these mobile devices and will need to log in. They've cut quota restrictions for downloads because they want students to start working on the material and collaborating and doing all of those wonderful things that they should be doing. Now I'm going to make a guess. Is that the kind of culture we have at Monash? No?
We are putting in a Wireless Everywhere project.
ITS guy? No?
Faculty of Education.
Okay.
But I mean, we're trying to work together with ITS to get the best outcome for the money that
Do we have any ITS folks in the audience? Technology folks? Yep. From Swinburne. How's the network there?
We're evolving, so it's in transition at the moment and not very popular.
It is really a cultural mismatch. I went to a meeting with IT directors, core